Imposter syndrome. It is very, very common in PhD students, and there's not a week that goes by that I don't see this in my own students, in other people's students, in academia in general, and it tends to go something like this.
I'm not sure how I even made it this far, how I got onto this PhD program in the first place. I've just been lucky. I don't have a clue what I'm doing, and I'm just worried that everybody's going to find me out and I'm going to be exposed for the fraud that I am.
So if you've had any thoughts like that lately, you are not alone. And I think the time when this tends to get worse, the time when those voices really are screaming at you, is when you've got to present on your research, when you're going to a conference and you've got a paper that you're going to deliver there. Or when you've got like an internal review and you're going to present your progress so far to a panel of people that you don't really know that well. That can really get your imposter monster kicking up a stink. And it's worrying for you because the people that you're presenting to are a bit of an unknown entity. They're people that you might not know very well, they're people that you might not have met before. And when we're in situations like that, we tend to build these people up to be these individuals who are going to give us a really tough time, and they are going to see right through us, and we're going to be exposed, and oh my goodness, it's all just going to come crashing down around us. And it's completely normal to have these feelings, to feel this way, to feel like you're an imposter, like you don't know what you're doing, like you're just winging it. Most of us, and by us I mean academics, professors like me, most of us feel this way quite a bit of the time as well. But the difference is that many of us have learned coping strategies in terms of what we do when those thoughts kind of start coming into our heads, the things that we can use to kind of quieten them back down again and get back in control. So I think you have to realise that this imposter syndrome, this kind of confidence issue, is something that's never going to go away completely. It's always going to be there. There will be times when you feel anxious and when you feel nervous about stuff. But there are things you can do to make sure that this doesn't erupt into a massive existential crisis. There are things that you can do to actually put that imposter monster back in its box. So we're going to have a look at that in this video. For those of you who are new to my channel, hello, welcome. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and I've got 2 decades worth of experience of supporting social science students in UK universities. And imposter syndrome is something that I've wanted to do a video on for a while because there's lots of stuff out there about it, but I haven't come across anything that's really helpful in terms of what to do when it rears its ugly head. So in this video, we're going to be looking at 3 things. Firstly, how to actually engage with those feelings that you get when imposter syndrome strikes. Secondly, how to anticipate questions that people might ask you and prepare some answers so that you have them ready. And thirdly, the best way that you can respond when somebody asks you a question and you literally don't know how to respond to it. So let's get into them now. So firstly, engage with those feelings. When you get that onset of imposter syndrome, when you get that anxiety, that kind of dread, that catastrophizing that starts to happen, some people, when they start getting these feelings and kind of going through these processes, they get completely caught up in them and just get dragged into this downward spiral, and it's really not very pleasant at all. Other people will try to kind of deny that they're happening and will try to push these things down or run away from them. You are going to do something different. You are going to take those feelings and those processes and those things that are going on, and you're going to talk to them. You are going to say something like this. Hey, anxiety, not seen you for a while. I'm kind of busy right now because I've got this PhD review panel to prepare for, but you can hang out with me for a bit, that's fine. Now, this might seem completely nuts, but there is method in my madness. Now, the reason why I'm encouraging you to do this is because when you're doing this kind of thing, you are noticing that feeling, you are acknowledging that it's there. And in the process, you are not judging yourself for having this feeling, you're not putting yourself down for having this feeling. You see it, you engage with it, you make it okay to have this feeling, and you're not rattled by it. It's fine, it's just there, it's just a thing. What you're not going to do is get into some kind of therapy situation with yourself when you spend ages trying to figure out why you've got this feeling and analysing it, because what happens when you do that is that you feed it and it becomes bigger, and what was a feeling and a thing turns into a problem. That kind of thing will become a drain on your energy. You'll put way too much focus on the fact that you have this feeling and trying to figure out why it's there and all of this stuff. And then what's going to happen next is you're going to start judging yourself for having that feeling. You're going to start feeling bad about having it. And then you just get into this sort of spiral of decline and this spiral of despair with it. And you waste lots of your time and your mental energy, and it takes up loads of your bandwidth, and it's just not great. So use this script and insert your own feelings and your own situation into it, and just get used to saying it out loud whenever you feel that imposter syndrome creeping up on you. The next thing you do is take some action. You actually start anticipating the kind of questions that people might ask you and preparing some answers that you can deliver in response to those questions. So if you've got an internal PhD review panel and you've had to prepare a presentation for that panel, go through that presentation and try and anticipate the kind of things that people might ask you about it and start drafting out some answers to the questions that you're likely to get. Talk to your supervisory team about this as well, because very often people on your supervisory team will be people who sit on review panels for other PhD students. So they're familiar with the process of this kind of thing, and they can anticipate the kind of questions that you might be asked based on the kind of questions that they've asked other students. Another really helpful thing you can do is actually get your friends and family on board with this. So if you're doing a presentation at a conference and you've got a nice little PowerPoint slide deck, go through that with a friend or a family member and ask them to give you some feedback on it. You can also do this with fellow students as well, anybody who's in your peer network, because other people will notice things that you don't notice, especially if they're not subject experts, if they're not used to studying the subject that you're studying in such a granular level of detail. They'll be able to pick up on things that you kind of take for granted, like understanding of particular words and terms and that kind of thing. Other people are also really good for zooming out and for looking at the bigger picture and the so what questions in terms of, well, how's this research going to be used? Who's it relevant for? Where does it apply? Those kind of things. So get other people on board, people who are outside of your supervisory team, be that your peers, fellow PhD students, family members or friends, because they are going to be super helpful. So after you've done this, you come up with a list of questions and a list of responses that you can give to those questions. Don't make it really lengthy. Don't script out your responses like word for word, because you're not going to be able to remember them and it's going to be really difficult to kind of get them into your head. Instead, just use a few keywords and a few key phrases. You might want to put them on some little cards or put them on the notes app on your phone so that you can regularly have a little scroll through it. But make sure that this stuff is in a place where you can easily access it. So you can just have a flick through and familiarise yourself with it, and it will make you feel a bit more confident about it as well. One thing that can also be helpful is to speak out loud to yourself, because when we've got things written down, often they are going to come across in a different way, or we're going to phrase them slightly differently when we're verbalising them, when we're talking about them. So you can just imagine, in the morning in front of the mirror that somebody should ask you one of the questions that's cropped up, and just deliver the answer verbally. And you'll find that you'll become way more confident. You'll become way more used to kind of thinking on your feet and kind of having to pull words out of your head. So say these things out loud. Okay, get used to speaking your responses rather than just reading them off your notes. The last thing that you need to do is rehearse how you are going to respond when somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer to. Now, spoiler alert, this will happen. Okay, there will be people who ask you questions that you hadn't thought of before, that your friends, family and supervisory team won't have thought of before. So the trick is not in, thinking of every possible question that anybody could ever ask you. The trick is in being prepared to deal with any question that someone might ask you, especially those that you're not going to know the answer to. So this is a technique that I've developed for myself and that I use myself quite a lot. So you can steal this one from me. So somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer to it. The first thing that you are going to do is say this.
Thank you for that question. That is really interesting.
The next thing you're going to do is take a deep breath, hold it, and slowly release it. And nod on the release, okay? It's going to go a bit like this. Now this generally helps you to calm yourself down whilst at the same time signalling to your audience that you are processing their question. By the time that breath has come out, you might have thought of the answer, or you might have come up with a way to respond to it. And you'd be amazed actually at how quickly your brain works in these kind of situations. So sometimes just taking that beat, just taking those few seconds and filling it with that breath and with that nodding and engaging with the audience can be all that you need to just get those neurons firing. Now, if your brain hasn't come up with the answer or hasn't come up with an immediate response to that question, here are some of the things you can say. I hadn't considered that before, so I need to give it some thought. What would you recommend? By directing these questions to the person who's asked you the question, you are acknowledging that their question is valuable to you, but you're also trying to draw on their knowledge and expertise too. You are recognizing their knowledge and expertise. You are kind of deferring to them in a way, which can sometimes be quite a helpful thing to do, especially if you get the impression that that person's question was a little bit kind of aggressive. And most of the time in the academic world, when PhD students are presenting about their research at conferences or to internal review panels, the audience is a supportive one. Okay, we want you to do well, we want you to succeed, we're not deliberately trying to trip you up. But sometimes the way that people come across with their question can make them appear a little bit aggressive and can make us feel a bit like, And the best way that we can do that is to try and kind of diffuse the situation a bit. And the best way to do that is to appeal to other people's egos. So by saying something like, what would you recommend? What are your thoughts on this? You are acknowledging their expertise. And when you do that, that makes them a little bit more amenable. And that's it, we're done. Those are 3 top tips to help you overcome that imposter syndrome when you're presenting about your research. So firstly, engage with your feelings. Secondly, anticipate the kind of questions you might be asked and prepare some answers for those questions. And thirdly, learning that tactic, that breathing in, holding it, breathing out, nodding, asking questions of the person who's asked you the question. All of this stuff is going to be really helpful to you. And as I said at the beginning, imposter syndrome doesn't go away. It's something that you're going to experience kind of on and off throughout your academic career. So the trick is not in trying to prevent it from happening in the first place, but to know how to respond appropriately when it does rear its ugly head, and not to turn it into like a massive catastrophe or an existential crisis. So hopefully you're going to have neither of those things happen. So that's it. We're done. All good. I will be back next time with more tips on how to supercharge your studies. I'll see you then.